All right, so we are live here with Joel Klettke. Joel, I'm going to let you do a little intro for yourself for those of the people out there who do not know who you are.
Sure. So I'm a conversion copywriter. My background, I used to work at an agency. I used to be an SEO. So I did that for almost 5 years, but always loved to write. Never saw a career in it until kind of saw the whole digital world turn its face towards content. So I launched my career in 2013 out of my own, originally just focusing on the content side and blog posts and those types of assets, but then was exposed to the world of conversion copy through a peer named Jonna Weeb. She's kind of the queen bee of the industry and just ran with it. It combined what I love in analytics and creativity. So I've been doing that at a pretty high level since. So I've had the chance to work with some clients like HubSpot, and we helped double their conversions. I've had the chance to work with WP Engine, a whole lot of software, a whole lot of agencies. So I've written a whole lot of agency sites, and I've lived inside of that world kind of from both sides. And then about 3.5 years ago, I also spun off a second company called Case Study Buddy. And all we do is help B2B companies like agencies, like software, capture, share, and cash in on customer success stories. So that's more of a productized service. We've got a really great team on that front and really similar clientele. So we've worked with Moz and Hotjar and Unbounce and a whole bunch of different software on that side, and then agencies too. So I kind of orbit the agency world, and I do a whole lot on the conversion front, and then also have been kind of getting my hands dirty, learning to grow a business in Case Study Buddy. So it's been a ride for the past few years.
Nice, man. And your clients at Case Study Buddy is your becoming more of your focus now, right? Because we spoke, just for context for those people watching, me and you had like a little messenger chat, which I want to talk about more, just kind of like the transition that you're going through with your business and how you got to that point. Because I think it's a very common point that a lot of entrepreneurs get to, especially a copywriting business that even more than a consulting business runs directly through you, right? So like figuring out how to scale that out can be a challenge. And it seems like you're at that point now where, I mean, like what is kind of like your next move for the companies, because they're growing,
Yeah.
but it seems like you're starting, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're starting to hit some friction in the growth, which we all do.
Yeah, I think it's more just a matter of I've become painfully aware of my limitations on my time. And so both businesses, like the conversion side, is never something I'm going to kill or that I'm going to do away with, but I'm in a position now where I can work on fewer but bigger projects. I can command a premium. I can work with a client, who really gets the way that I operate and wants to. That's the little guy coming.
No, it's all good, man.
Wants to be doing the conversion copy. So in the past kind of year, I've seen an evolution in that business where I've actually done more on the auditing side, and I've generated more revenue, pretty much consulting, coming in, helping diagnose, here are the issues, making recommendations to fix them, than the copy work itself. So I've done things like subcontracting the production work. I continue to do that. But in the meantime, Case Study Buddy, I'm just sitting on what I see as this massive opportunity. We're blue ocean in terms of competition. We've got, we compete with, I guess, freelancers, but they can't do it at the level we do it. Agencies have case studies as an add-on, but they're not focused on it like we are. So I want to take, my next move is giving myself the space to scale up Case Study Buddy, to get it to a point. It already runs without me, but we've barely scratched the surface on growth. So I really want to get my hands dirty on that side of things and scaling up and improving our offering there. The conversion side I'll continue to hang on to, but not as much of a focus, at least for the coming year. And I want to get Case Study Buddy to the point that it's operating at a higher level consistently, and kind of prime it to be doing bigger, better, more often type of work. So that's where my focus will be for 2020. But by no means am I kind of shutting down the conversion copy stuff. That's still my passion. Right. That's still the work I love to do.
Right. Real quick for everyone watching on Facebook, if you guys have any questions for Joel, just drop them in the chat. I've got a list of questions and some conversation topics to talk about, but whatever you guys interject with, David and I will fire away and ask David. I kind of want to unpack Case Study Buddy a little bit more. Talk to us a little bit more about, I've seen the work, so I know, but for the people who don't, like, what is it that you do? What does that process look like? How much do you charge? And then also, what does the back end operations look like? Like you said, you weren't doing the work. Who's actually doing the work for you now?
Yeah. So Case Study came out of an engagement. I was connected to someone. I did a project, and it's the kind of person who's just so well connected you don't say no to. And he asked me if I would be willing to take a stab at doing a case study for this kind of, at the time, a startup who was funded and growing, but they need some help on the content front. And so the first one, I did the whole thing myself. And I quickly realized, all right, hey, here's an asset that commands a premium. It's way harder to do than people think it is. I can build a process around this that I can teach to other people. So with conversion work, for example, you have to get to a certain level of being able to analyze and get in the weeds and work with data. That's much harder to teach someone than how to tell a great story, how to run a great interview, how to put together a great case study asset. So I kind of looked around and thought, well, who's our competition? Like, surely somebody's planted the flag and said, this is what I'm really great at. I'm the specialist on top of the pack. And there was one woman who had branded herself as the expert, and then this smattering of like freelancers and add-on services. So I thought, well, why not me? So why not start the company that does that? So what Case Study Buddy does is with customer success stories, there's a lot of friction for companies, whether it's they don't know how to get clients to agree to be in them, or if they can get clients to agree to be in them, how do they run the interview? Or if they run a good interview, how do I write this up? And it's such a high touch asset because you're essentially asking a client to do you a favor and you get one shot at it. Like if you screw up the interview, you can't go back to them and say, hey, can we do another interview? They're giving you their time. And so we operate in a space where our goal is to make the process as frictionless, as methodical, and as fun for everyone as possible. And so when we started, the focus was just getting the core product there. So just understanding, okay, how do we run a really great interview? How do we get that interview time down to minimize the amount of time we need from the customer for their input and still maximize what we can do with that? So we've gotten it down. We can get everything we need in a 30-minute call, everything we need to tell that story really, really well. And then the next step is how do we write this up in a way that people actually want to read? So when you look around the industry, most customer success stories are boring or bad or have no substance. It's like X is a client from Y space. We did this bullet point list of things for them. Here's the KPI we got.
Yeah, they're just checking the box of like, we have a case study in this vertical.
Totally. And half the time they don't even have any customer quotes. They have no customer input, and yet they're meant to be customer success stories. But a lot of companies treat them like us success stories, like, oh, look at what we did. So they miss the human element, the human emotion, the decision factors, the pain points, the things that make that story compelling just get ripped out and becomes this very static, boring asset. So we wanted to do something different. And so that was the next step, is how do we make these compelling to read? How do we make them also something that won't just be used at the end of the funnel? So when we looked at how companies were using these, I mean, historically, when you think about case studies, like, well, this is something that we hand to sales. Sales might use it to close the deal, but that's kind of the extent of it, which I think is a huge mistake because these are marketing assets. So you can use a great customer success story across the entire funnel. You can use it to generate interest in leads. You can use it to nurture those leads towards a sale. You can use it to upsell. So you can use it to move them from a lower tier to a higher tier of service. You can even use case studies to win back leads who have churned out. So if someone's disappeared on you, one of the most natural ways to reopen the conversation is just to say it's a modification on like what's become a very popular template. But hey, are you still interested in whatever they're interested in at the time? But with the addition, here's a story of someone who's just like you, who has the pains that we know you had, who made the decision we know you debated and got the result we know you want. So when you can come back with that versus just, hey, are you still interested? That changes the conversation. So Case Study is basically set up to take the entire process off your plate. You give us a warm intro. We can even help you surface candidates in your client base.
So off of that,
warm intro.
Sorry to cut you off, but just it popped in my head. Can you help out people who, because it's a difficult conversation sometimes to go to a client and be like, hey, can you do you have any tips for people who need help approaching their customers or their clients to get those stories? Like, do you send an email? How do you go about that?
So let's take it one step before you make the ask, because this is actually what's going to make the biggest difference. I'll talk about how to make the ask and how to deal with a no, or like preemptively get around a no. But before you even ask, there's something that more people should be doing. And it's nothing revolutionary, but if you're making your ask to a client and they haven't heard from you in months, or the only time they hear from you is when you shuttle off a report and say, here's how we're doing. If you're not frequently communicating with customers and then you come out of the blue from their perspective saying, hey, can you sing our praises? Yeah. You've already virtually guaranteed yourself a no. So one of the things, a big tip for people is start systematizing your feedback. So run, whether it's quarterly, whatever's appropriate for your vertical, whether it's quarterly check-ins, whether it's monthly NPS scores, whether it's just getting on the horn on a call, every so often, but have a systematized, scheduled approach to communicating with customers so that they hear from you. So before you even go about making the ask, and the reason that's so important is you don't want to come across like a stranger. You want to have that level of familiarity. And if you're doing that, now you've got way more opportunities to even know who's got to win, who is happy, who's got that ROI. So it's not a mystery anymore we should be going to. But let's talk about making the ask. So we normally, when we're working with clients, you can either do it via email or on a phone call. That really comes down to your relationship. The basic tenets of making the ask, there's a few tips that make a huge difference in terms of getting to a yes. So the first is you want to explain the why them and why now. Why are you asking them specifically, that person, that company, to take part, and why are you doing this right now? What's the impetus for your company putting these together? Give it a because. Hey, we're working on putting together a marketing strategy for the coming year. We're really proud of the work that we did together, and we'd love to throw the spotlight on you. That type of thing. So you want to give it, a why them, why now. One of the ways that you can kind of be a little bit more disarming is if you've ever asked somebody to give you a testimonial, things get kind of weird because mentally that changes the game for them. Now they're trying to think of, okay, how do I say something really glowing and really perfect and make you sound so good? You don't have the same kind of friction when you ask someone for feedback. So instead of saying, hey, will you sing our praises or can we get a testimonial? If you start the conversation with feedback, that's much easier to translate into a customer success story. The other way, that the subject line that we love using, and I'll just hand it to you, instead of saying case study in the subject line, if you're sending it via email, or if you're on the phone, it's just saying, can we have you in a case study? A better way to phrase it is, can we feature you? Because that sounds exciting. That sounds, like something that I want to be part of, versus a case study, which sounds like work, or maybe sounds like a little bit too much for me to want to commit to. And then the last one that's made a big difference, and then I'll talk about getting around a no. But the last one that makes a big difference is give it a deadline. So if you don't say, hey, we're hoping to have these published by X date, that gives your client mental permission to just deflect, or say, oh, well, yeah, we're interested, but now's not a good time. Give it a hard deadline. So say, hey, we want to go live with these by this date. Can we count you in? And that kind of motivates them to action. So I'll get to the next question is, okay, well, what if the client says no? What if the answer I get is not what I want to hear? A no is really one of three things typically. Either it's fear, so they don't know how they're going to be presented. They're not quite sure what will be disclosed. Fear comes out of not understanding the process. So if you can come back to them with the process and say, here's what it's going to look like. Here's exactly how long it's going to take you. Here are the types of things you're going to be asked. But then the line that's the absolute killer, the one that really helps make people comfortable is, hey, nothing will be published without your approval. You're going to have a chance to review. You're going to have a chance to make any changes you want. That gives them control, so that counters that fear. The next is the time question. So they're going, well, how long is this going to take? So if you leave that open-ended, then they're going to imagine the worst. They're going to say, well, I'm going to have to be on an hour-long interview, and then I'm going to have to do all this other stuff.
Fly to Miami.
Totally. Exactly. So if you can preempt that by saying, hey, this entire process, and now you have to be truthful about it, but if you can get your process at the point that, hey, this entire process is going to take you an hour total, and that's our target for Case Study Buddy, is everything we need from being on the call to reviewing the draft and signing final approval. Obviously, if their legal department has to review it, that's a bit of a different story. But for that person, hey, this whole thing is going to take less than an hour of your time. And then the last one that can be the hardest to counter, that's the what's in it for me. So why should I do you a favor? So that's why I started this conversation by saying, hey, if you're already on good terms and communicating well, and you know a client is happy and they're used to hearing from you, then it's not this crazy ask for you to be like, hey, can we feature you? But there's some things you can do. So if you must, this isn't what we default to, but if you must, you can incentivize it. So maybe it's a month of free service, maybe it's a discount, maybe it's something like that. For companies that are SEO savvy, maybe it's, hey, we're going to be publishing this here. We're going to send you a link from there. We're going to be trying to get it hosted and featured there. That can be an incentive too. If you've got a really good social following, so if you've got, a lot of followers, you got, an audience that might actually be buyers for them, that's a piece of leverage you can use. So, hey, we're going to make you look really good, and we're going to share it with this number of people. We're going to push you with this campaign. If you show you've got skin in the game to make it worth their while, that can really help. And then the one that can help with all of those, and it's kind of universally made a big difference in terms of getting the yes, send them a sample. And not just a sample, a beautifully designed sample. Show them what the end product looks like. Make it sexy. Let them see, hey, this looks really, really good. This looks really, really beautiful. If you don't have a sample of your own, take somebody else's and just say, hey, this is what we're aiming for. It doesn't even have to be yours. Just say, this is the type of thing that we're gunning for, and make sure it's best in class. Because when they can see it and it's tangible and they can get excited about the production level and how it looks and sounds and feels, then again, it's much more easy to say yes to that than some ambiguous, can you be in a story?
So say you're running this process. What kind of numbers do you need to start with in terms of potential leads for inclusion in a case study to get to enough? And how many yeses do you ultimately need? Are you looking for 1 or 3 or how many?
I honestly wish I had hard data to say like exactly this or do exactly that. We always tell companies that this is kind of like snowballing. You want to start with the low hanging fruit. So if you've got people that are really happy, I mean, start with 1, start with the easiest yes you can get and snowball from there. But I mean, you don't have to have thousands of clients or even hundreds of clients to make this a go. It's less of a numbers game. It's less of like, I wouldn't drop it into the same bucket as say like B2B telemarketing, where it's like, you're just hoping on a wild shot that someone's gonna be interested on the other end. So, I mean, you have relationships with these people and it's less about the numbers game and shotgunning it. And it's way, way more about timing. So how close are they to have had that win? How close are you to the customer in that moment? Because I mean, we've got a client, they're a market leader in the information security space, and they deal with like mega enterprises. So everybody, the big complaint is always, oh, we're under NDA. There's no way we can get this. That's a bullshit excuse. It's a terrible excuse. We've interviewed companies on the Fortune 100 for these guys. They are willing, but the way that they make it work is that they do these quarterly check-ins. They know when there's a win. They know this is part of the program of engagement with the client. And so they have a crazy close rate. Like almost anybody they ask, they can get to yes, because they've got that structure on the back end to make it happen. So I would think about it less in terms of like, how many doors do I have to knock? And more in terms of how can I create an environment and a communication line with my customers that this is an easy no-brainer yes, because they're in love with what we're doing and they're happy with the results.
So we're actually going through this right now for the blueprint, year end. We're just going through and we're collecting as many. We just do short video testimonials. It's kind of the easiest thing for us to capture. Yep. But 2 questions. Number 1 is that when you're in it, so like when you're an SEO agency or copywriting, you have access to their data, so you know that they're getting results, right? What about in a space like our training platform where people go through the course? We can see people have gone through the course, but we don't necessarily know how they feel about it. So like, how do you recommend like an NPS score? Like, we have a Slack channel now with a couple hundred customers in it. And we've basically just been like posting and I think we made the mistake of just asking for straight up, like, if you fuck with us, like give us a testimonial type thing. And it's worked because I think that in a course, because we're with them in there every day in Slack talking to them, there's a little bit more of a connection than a client that, like you said, you never speak to. But like, how would you go about kind of testing the water to see if people would even be interested in it,
Yeah. So the best way, and honestly, this is a growing segment for us, people who run courses, coaches, training, whatever. And you start, so again, I'll take 1 step back from your question because you're at the end and how do we get it here? But if you start at the beginning, it's as simple as every single person who comes in should be getting onboarded, not with an MBS score or anything like that, which they couldn't fulfill. But you should be asking them some simple questions about what's your motivation? Why did you join? What problems are you hoping to solve? What do you hope to get out of this? What hesitations did you have? Start telling the story at the point, like next time you open this up or the next wave, whatever, every single person coming in, make that part of the onboarding. And then as the course progresses, as things are happening, you want to check in halfway. Hey, are you getting out of this what you thought you'd get out of it? Those problems, you can remind them because you've got that past data, right? So you can say, hey, this is what you told us you want to solve. How's that going? And not only will that make your training better and your relationship better and show that you're listening, that's also in the background, you starting to draw this narrative. And then when you reach a point where whatever's appropriate for your course or program or whatever, where it's like, okay, it's results time. It's time to do a roll call. It's time to get people excited about what they've done. Then you want to make it a celebratory event. So it's not just, hey, give us a testimonial. It's like, hey, we want to showcase some wins. We want to show you off. Like, we're looking for stories. So you send out 1 more survey. So you start, it's kind of escalating commitment. At the beginning, they tell you where they're at. In the middle, they tell you how it's going. At the end, it's a very simple, like, did you achieve what you want to achieve? What do your numbers look like? How did this go for you? And so an NPS score wouldn't be the right tool in this case, because just knowing someone's really happy with you doesn't tell you anything about whether or not they're the type of story you'd even want to feature. Like if somebody came in already an expert, like that went really well, I enjoyed it. That's not as powerful a story as say someone who came in as like knew nothing, learned exactly what they needed to, and then leveled up. So by structuring things that way with kind of 3 steps, then you get the whole trajectory, but you can also filter for yourself on your side what types of stories. Because the one thing I didn't mention earlier too is a lot of companies want to jump straight into just production. Like, oh, somebody's happy, let's showcase the win. But before that, you got to consider 2 things. What are your goals? Like where are you as a business trying to grow into? Is it a type of person? Is it a type of space? Are you trying to showcase a particular type of part of your service or feature your product or whatever? You got to define where you're trying to get to. And then with your customers, you got to find stories that support that and align. What did these people want? How did they support our goals? Because the example I always use is like, let's say you're an SEO agency and you get this amazing result for this yoga instructor, but they were hell on earth to work with. And as it happens, every yoga instructor you ever work with is hell on earth to work with. The stories that you share are going to be the stories you attract. So you probably don't want to publish, even though it's a great metric, that successful yoga story, because if you start being seen as, hey, these are the go-to guys for yoga SEO, that's not who you want to be. That doesn't align with your goals. So just having those metrics is not going to help you. You have to have a strategy behind all this.
Yeah, it's funny. As a marketer, I'm always so focused on acquisition, but running through the blueprint and, pushing, we've been operational for 9 months now, but realizing the importance of community support, engagement, like really building a relationship with it, even though it's a one-time payment, right? You pay us once and then you're in for life. But our focus has been so much more the last few months of how do we nurture the community? How do we get people, like the value doesn't come when they pay us. The value comes when they go through the whole course, right? That's when we both win. And that's a really good tip, especially with using Slack. We can automate kind of a lot of those onboarding messages, which we already have, but that's really good input to fine tune it and to check in. And, we're hiring more community people because, like I said, it's incredibly important, man. I mean, just a lot of people with trainings too, they join it and they need that extra level of accountability. Just like the reason people hire a personal trainer isn't necessarily because they don't know how to do a push-up. It's because they need that, or a coach, they need that extra level of accountability. And yeah, that's really good input. Thank you.
I guess with case studies, because a lot of the folks watching this will be in like kind of agency world or individual marketing consultants, right? So how have you found case studies are different for service or like agency type of businesses versus like, say, like a software product?
Yeah. So for a software product, I mean, the narrative kind of revolves around, it winds up being a story more about how individual features or aspects of that software tie to use cases for that client. So instead of being this relationship, because with the software, it's often self-serve, right? You got this arm's length. So unless it's something that's like really hands-on and you're helping them implement and then you're checking in with them, like for a lot of software, that's just not the model. So it's a lot harder to bake in those relationship elements with kind of software and products, because you're talking about aspects of the product. With an agency, what gets missed so often, and I'll break it down section by section, because if you can manage to do this, your success rates will be that much better. But a lot of companies, there's this whole relational component. People don't just hire you for their results that you can get. They hire you because they want to work with you and the way you do things, and the way you communicate and how you problem solve and how you think. Like with an agency, it's not just, oh, well, I guess I need an SEO, so point and shoot, right? Part of the criteria is who do I feel comfortable working with and all of that. So when you're telling a story for a kind of a service, number one, the KPIs aren't always the biggest deal. So everyone wants to have, yes, we want to see this, 200% traffic lift or like doubled HubSpot's conversions. Like that's the sexy metric. But a lot of agency stories, a lot of value can come in stories with no KPI. So it can be about how you communicated with them or how you got them through, from A to B and the thinking that took them along that journey. If you can't get a hard success metric, that doesn't mean that the study is a wash. But section by section, because I said I was going to do that, the problem section. So the thing most people do is they just say, this was the customer's challenge. Most people, what more people should do is, here's the challenge, here's how that felt for them, and here's what not solving that problem would have meant for them. Like a story should have tension, it should have stakes, it should have, why was that such a challenge? What was the obstacle? Not just they wanted to grow their business. Everyone wants to grow their business, but what would doing that make possible for them? What would not doing that mean for the company? Then in the solutions section, again, I kind of joked about this earlier, but we tend to see these bullet point lists of like, we did a comprehensive ad campaign, we targeted this demographic. But what you did is as important as why you did it. Why did you use that strategy? Why did you go about it that way? What went wrong and how did you pivot? People tend to be reticent to put anything negative in studies where it's like, hey, this didn't totally work out, so we had to do something instead. But that's real life. And showing how you can creatively problem solve, how you can get a client through the reality of a marketing challenge, that's valuable to include as well. And then the results section, we all love to tout like the big KPI or the big lift and increase. But what people forget, what marketers especially forget is what's not just the result, what's the impact? What did that mean for them? What was made possible by the fact that, hey, okay, you got a 200% traffic increase. What did that mean for the in-house marketing team? What did that mean for the company as a whole? Maybe they didn't have to hire another role because the leads were coming in already. What did that mean for the CEO? When you can go beyond just the metric and dig into those human impacts, like the example that I love, because this is a SaaS example, but everybody will talk about, well, improved, like you'll see metrics in the SaaS world, like it improved office admin efficiency by 50%. Okay, that's fine. But when you couple that with a quote, like now the secretary doesn't have to chase people around the office for invoices, that's a human impact. That makes it real. So for the person reading that, they go, oh, I get it. That's what we're dealing with. So you go from this nebulous like efficiency to something that's actually tangible, real, desirable. And so that's where so many of these fall on their face. So I think especially with services, you have so much leverage and opportunity to explore the emotional human side of it and what that actually meant for them.
Word. So we want to move into a little bit more copywriting. That was incredibly helpful, actually, by the way.
Yeah, I wish we talked yesterday before.
Yeah, seriously, before we berated our
Hey guys, can you share some testimonials? Thanks.
Get on camera and tell us how great we are. No, but I do want to talk about copy. We actually had a question from someone about direct marketing, but just a few quick questions about copy. So,
sure.
I mean, I look at the way you write copy. I look at your website. I've seen some of your talks. And you seem to be a very creative person, not just like a technically sound writer, right? I mean, how much of copywriting do you think is creative and can really good copy be learned?
Yeah, so really good copy absolutely can be learned. I think there's this big misnomer where everybody imagines that you have to be some Don Draper type, just like slinging whiskey and like struck by a lightning bolt of genius, and that's where great copy comes from. That's not it at all. One of the things that originally pissed me off about copywriting and almost kept me from getting into it was the idea of copywriting being a science. Because I think a lot of people look at that and it triggers this feeling of like, I don't want to be like a fill in the blanks Mad Libs person. Like I don't want to plunk in a formula. I want to do creative work. I want to have these lightning bolts of genius. I want to be the Don Draper. But I think the best quote for summing this up, it's from a book that came out, I think it's the 50s, called Breakthrough Advertising. Every copywriter will cite it. But the quote is, great copy is not written, it's assembled. And so the science part of it is when you know what to go out and look for, when you know how to understand your customer, what you need to ask them, why you need to ask them. We can get into all that. I can break that stuff down. But when you understand the formulas and the way people think and the things you need to learn, when you go and collect this big bundle of Lego pieces, think of it that way. So now you understand pain points, you understand anxieties, you understand hesitations. Now you can put them together any way you want. It's kind of like playing an instrument. You learn all the scales, you learn all the notes, you do all the practice so that you can then blow the doors off with creativity because you know where to bend and break and how to put it all together. So you can absolutely learn to be a great copywriter, and the creativity actually can be bred by constraints. So when I know I've got a headline to communicate one big idea and I've got to find a way to make that work, that takes creativity. And that too can be learned. So you can use different techniques to jostle different things from your mind or to think about it in different ways. So I don't think you have to be this, artsy fartsy type of person. I think some of the best copywriters in the world weren't creative people. They were analytical and it came through in creative ways, but they're just really, really good at researching and empathizing.
I'm curious about like from a team perspective, if you're writing copy across a site, if you're writing, you know, say you're like redoing a blog or something like that, a corporate blog, how do you communicate that kind of like artistic sense or playing the instrument, you know, of like the feel that you can pick up for the language of that business? How do you communicate, or is it possible to communicate that throughout a team or to freelance writers to like cohesively actually execute the vision that you have?
Sure. So, I mean, this is a little bit more on the content side of things if we're talking like blog posts, but there is a good answer for it. And that is like expectations. We'll start with this. Expectations that aren't communicated are rarely met. I think a lot of companies expect a freelancer or even a staff member to just like absorb the ethos of that company, be like, become them personified. But you can document this. Voice and tone guides are not just this boring, dry exercise. They're putting boundaries on creativity. You're setting the rules of the playing field. So there's a lot of tools that can help sort of shape that. So some basic ones when I was working on things like voice and tone guides are like X but not Y statements. So in combination, these start to shape the personality of the company. So for example, funny but not crude. We're professional but not stiff. So when you can have a qualifier and then an anti-qualifier, so something that gives it a meaningful constraint, that can really help. I think one thing companies don't do a lot of is taking an example of something that is an embodiment of who they are and how they want to sound, and using that in complement with the voice and tone. So the more you can bring in samples, like we would write it this way, not that way, but not just ending there, but giving it a because. So because our audience is this type of person, we would use this type of language or this type of voice versus this type of thing. But if that's not documented, if there's no roadmap for me coming in, if the expectation is that I'm going to read the mind of the CEO and somehow get up to speed, it's not going to happen. It never will happen, because a lot of people get frustrated when they hire writers because they're like, well, that's not how I would write it. And it's like, how is anyone supposed to write it the way you would write it? So on the content front, definitely voice and tone guides. I think on the copywriting front, like when we separate the two, content's what I would drop in the bucket of like ebooks, blog posts, the things we traditionally think as marketing assets or content assets. When it comes to copywriting, the best thing I think most founders and people who aren't strong on the actual writing piece can do is act as the subject matter expert and then get the hell out of the way. So it doesn't matter. This is not like, it's not going to sell really well with people, but it doesn't matter if you like it, if it sells. It doesn't matter if you would say it that way, if that's what will hit home with your audience. Now, obviously parameters on that, you don't want to run counter to the brand. You don't want to do things that are, you know, just like for the sake of the sale. Like I could put free everything on every website and we'd see conversions go through the roof. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is copywriting is less about getting bogged down in individual word choice and more about pulling mental levers. Like what are these people's pain points? What are these people's anxieties? What might keep them from buying? Why do they feel that way? It's more about your audience's motivation than how you think you want to sound. And so it's a tightrope of walking between the two with that, especially.
So you said, Joel, that you had a process and framework. I actually saw your post that where you're talking about with Ahrefs when Tim emailed you, which I thought was pretty cool. But if I was, let's say I'm your everyday agency owner, SEO, digital marketing, whatever you want to call it, and I can't afford to pay a copywriter like yourself. I mean, how would you suggest that they go about tackling the copy for their website, homepage, about page? Like what type of pages do they need? And like, how would you go about instructing them to create their own copy for their website?
Yeah. So the first thing you got to do is talk to people. Don't start with a blank screen. Don't start with a boardroom table. Don't start huddling around thinking about who do we want to be when you grow up. That comes later. Start by talking to people. So structured feedback is something anybody can go out and collect. Asking the right questions is something, even if you're not a great writer, even if you can't wordsmith it well, the good news is you don't have to. You can steal a lot of your best copy straight out of the mouths of your customers. So the first thing you want to do is start having calls or do both, send out surveys. So the way to structure these to make it practical, tangible, so we're not just leaving this live going, hey, talk to my customers and no idea what to ask them. It's very similar to what we do with case studies. The things we're trying to learn actually are often very close to the same. There's 5 things we want to understand about your customer, 5 things we're on the hunt for, then I'm going to tell you how to go and get it. So the 5 things we need to learn. We need to understand, I've mentioned this a few times, their pain points. What problem is it that people are coming to you to solve? So you might think they'd be like, well, they want to rank better. That might be, right? For SEO, that might be. But there's underlying things to that. How do they talk about why they want to rank better, why they want to grow? What language do they use surrounding those pain points? The next thing we want to learn is their desired outcomes. When they imagine that bigger, better future, what does that look like for them? And again, using an SEO example, everyone's going to say, well, they want to rank number 1. Yes, that's super common. That is the desire. But take it a step back. What will that make possible for them? Why do they want to grow that way? What is it that they're trying to achieve? The next thing is anxieties. You want to understand the things that might keep them from buying. So I see this all the time in the agency world. It's the number one reason with most SEO companies in particular, as people have been burned in the past. They're scared to be ripped off. They've worked with an agency. Like the number one decision factor I come up with over and over and over again when I'm working specifically on agency sites, it's not ROI. It's not how long you've been in business. It routinely comes down to how well you communicate. How well, how often, how frequently, how in the loop do they feel? You can deliver even obviously this is not a recipe for success, but there are companies that don't deliver like the elite level result, but because they communicate so much better with the client always knows what's being done, why it's being done, and so on. They retain those customers and those customers are happy. So you want to understand the anxieties. Is it because, have your leads been burned in the past? Have they, spent a lot of money on something and it hasn't panned out? Do they lack the time to do themselves, the knowledge to do themselves? You want to learn that. So pain points, desired outcomes, anxieties, and then priorities is number 4. So all those things we just talked about, the things they want, the things that they're struggling with, the things that might keep them from buying, they're not all created equal. So some of those will be, say, nice to haves or deal breakers. Some of them will be mild inconveniences. So you want to get a sense of not only how they talk about their pain points, their anxieties, their desired outcomes in their own words, which is why you have to talk to people. You have to actually survey them, interview them, document this, because that's where your copy is going to come from. But then also get a sense of, okay, how do I quantify this? And that's as simple as looking at, and again, we'll get into the specifics in a minute, but looking at survey responses saying, how many people listed this as their number 1 issue? How many people talked about this factor in this way? So it's not the sexy part, but manual tabulation of what you're seeing in the results tied to how they actually talk about it. And then the 5th thing, and this is the thing that can absolutely break everything else that you just did. And I'll use a dumb example to illustrate it in a second. But the 5th thing is awareness level. How much do your leads already know by the time they're, whether it's hitting your website or picking up the phone and calling, how aware are they? So let's make this tangible. Let's imagine I'm selling floss sticks. Okay, I'm a floss stick salesman. If you already know about floss sticks and about my brand, and why you would use a floss stick, then all I have to do is come up to you and say, hey, you've got something in your teeth. I've got floss sticks here. Today they're 50 cents off. That's the whole pitch, because you're most aware. So you don't need to be sold on the benefit, how it works, any of that stuff. You just need to know the deal. So for those on that end of the spectrum, you just have to sell them the deal. So that's coupons, right? Like no one needs to educate me on why I need a bag of potatoes. I just want the coupon to go get the deal on the bag of potatoes. But with the floss sticks, bring this back. Let's say that somebody's pain aware. So they understand, okay, I've got a problem. I'm not ranking well. I'm not growing at the rate I want to. But they don't necessarily understand. They've never heard of you. They've maybe never worked with a firm like yours before. They don't really understand the mechanics of what's going to be done for them. That's a much longer conversation. So if we bring it back to floss sticks, if you were a pain aware person, so you've got something in your teeth, you've got something in your teeth, but, and I hope this is not true for anybody listening, you've never heard of floss before in your life. Now I've got to work much harder because I've got to say, hey, listen, you've got something in your teeth. When you've got something in your teeth, it doesn't adhere to social norms. You're going to look like an idiot. Beautiful men or women or whoever you're trying to aren't going to talk to you. So you need to get that out. To get that out, you might think about using a toothpick, but if you use a toothpick, you're going to have to jab a piece of wood in there like a caveman. You'll get splinters. It's not going to be a good time. I've got floss sticks. Floss sticks are like a delicate cleansing of your mouth, gently, silkily, wedging the food free. Like the pitch
Sounds
is
like
longer, it's
copywriting,
more
Joel.
in depth.
I just wrote out a homepage from my blog, and I thinking about it now, I'm like, wow, I'm doing the floss stick thing.
But this is the thing, right? For a lead that knows less, we have to tell them more. We have to educate them more. So if let's say you're an agency and your primary audience is small business, and usually you're the first SEO firm your customers have ever hired in their lives. You're like the entry level. You're dealing with people who have never made a foray into digital marketing before. Your site has to have different and more pages probably than say someone who's serving the enterprise market. Because the enterprise market, there's hopefully very few companies that have like never heard of this. I mean, there are definitely industries, but never done this before. So on the small side of, this is not universally true, but I'm just using an example. For a company where your leads are less aware, you need to have more content that educates them on how you do the work and why you do it that way and what SEO is and that type of thing. But man, if you're trying to serve like mid-sized to enterprise clients and you're wasting half your services page explaining what SEO is, so you can rank for that phrase for some reason, you're targeting the wrong audience, the wrong awareness level. And so even if you got everything else right, the pain points and the hesitations and the desired outcomes, if you talk to that person at the wrong time, when they either know way more than you think they do or way less than you think you do, then you're either talking over them or you're talking down to them. So you need to figure out for your agency, for your leads, how much does my customer already know? How much do they know about the process? How much do they know about their pain? How much do they know about how this all works? And that should inform what types of pages you have. One thing I will say specific to agencies, especially the higher tier you go, it's an often overlooked page, but it starts making a massive difference. Your About Us page. Huge difference. Because on the low end, those people are commodity shoppers. They're just looking for somebody who can do anything. The higher you get up, I mentioned this earlier, people want to work with you because of what you've done, the way you think, the way you communicate. So that's where those pages become less of a big back pat for yourself and like, here's our entire history. And they're called About Us pages, but they're really more like Why Us pages. And that's where you show a lead, hey, we've served people like you. We believe the same things you do. We prioritize the same stuff you do. If this is what you want, we're the team to get it done. So those pages in particular, as you serve higher and higher markets, those become like mission critical.
Dude, I agree, man. I think the About page is by far the most underrated page on any B2B page. Our course page too, I really do think that is more of a decision page and a conversion page than people realize. I do feel like that people go there thinking that, hey, I want to learn more about this company, but it's really more, and they do for sure, but I feel like that's where you give them your best pitch, right? People show a certain level of interest by saying, I do want to learn more about you. And that's your time to really show them who you are, you know what I'm saying? And why work with you.
Yeah, it's who you are, what you're all about, what you stand for, what you believe, and what the experience of you is going to be like. Because I think a lot of people forget the goal of your website is not just to show up. It's not just to educate people on, what you do. It's to help people get a taster, get an experience, get the experience of working with you before they even work with you. And that's why case studies can be, if we're tying these two worlds together now, that's why they can be such a powerful asset, because those are a real tangible way for someone to get a sense of, here's what it's like to work with these people. Here's someone like me who had been burned in the past and dealt with a crappy company that sent them awful reports and didn't communicate with them. And here's what they loved about this experience instead. And so if we bring those two worlds together, like, that's why I believe strongly in the conversion side and talking to customers and letting them be the driver of the way you position yourself. And then also why I believe in case studies, because the questions you ask for one inform the other and they complement each other so well.
Absolutely. So with our last 15 minutes or so here, I want to shift gears a little bit more to a bit more direct marketing style copywriting. I originally hit you up, and it took me months to get this on the books for this meeting, but I originally hit you up because I wanted to talk about link building outreach because I think it's something that it's still a necessity of SEO, right? Mm-hmm. Especially for newer websites that just lack authority, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But it's something that's gotten so commoditized, so spammed out. How would you approach, like if an agency were to hire you and say, hey, Joel, we really need some new email pitches for our link building process. Like how would you suggest structuring those pitches?
Yeah. I'll be fully transparent. When I worked agency side, this was the part of the job that I hated the most, that everybody struggles with, right? So I come by all this honestly. There's a stat. Hiplead did a study. Now this is specific to sales, but I think there's a nice translation here. Hiplead did a study that said mentioning a famous customer in your email more than tripled the positive response rates to that email. People responding in the affirmative, opening doors to say yes. So I'm not just saying this because I run a case study company. If I had the resources, I would be reaching out and citing, whether it's a case study, whether it's a testimonial, I would be citing who I've worked with. So in the context of link building, maybe that's mentioning the customer behind it. Maybe that's mentioning some group that you're associated with in a relevant way. But that would be one of the ways that I'll go about it. I think, honestly, we're getting to a point now, everybody wants link building to scale by doing these like massive blast outreach, like send a templatized thing to, 500 companies. And that's like the shotgun approach where it's like, okay, we're going to miss a whole bunch, but like 1 or 2 might hit. So let's go that road. I honestly believe we're getting to a point with link building where it pays more to do things that don't scale. And so my approach would be to surprise people with genuine knowledge. So we've all seen the templates that are like, I stumbled across your blog and I really like X piece. Everybody knows that formula, including everybody on the receiving end of those pitches. So I would take, if I would make a hit list of core targets that I knew, not just, again, I have the novelty of saying this because I'm not in an agency with a quota, but I would make a hit list of targets that I knew would change, not only just like in terms of the link profile, but change the fortunes of the business by being connected with them. So I would make a hit list of companies that are like, if we get links from here, that's going to open doors for us to get X and Y and Z. Or if we know this person, that's going to open doors. And then I'd play the long game. So I would learn about that person beyond just, here's a post you wrote one time and I like it. Maybe you want to link to this other thing that I did over here. I would learn something about that person that they wouldn't expect somebody who'd never heard of them to know. Maybe it's an interest that they've got. Maybe it's something that they did in their career that's like somewhat obscure. I would surface that stuff and I would trot that out. The other thing, and I'm hesitant to even put this out there because somebody kind of explained me about, but what I've seen worked well is, like if I wanted to introduce you, Ryan, like let's say I know a killer, I don't know, you need design work. You're like, hey, who do you know who like kills it on UX focused design? And I'd make an intro, right? I'd be like, Ryan meet Bill, Bill meet Ryan, Ryan is this, Bill is that. Hope you two can figure it out. I would almost try that approach where it's like, hey, X journalism or like X company, this is X person within this company. X person is doing some really cool stuff. And I think you guys might be naturally aligned here. And it might just, I just think it might be cool for you guys to meet each other, to know about each other, and know what the other person is doing. I would treat it almost more like an introduction of like, hey, you're two people doing really neat stuff in the same space without even like the direct pitch of like, here's a link to the thing. And then I'd follow up that way. Because I think that also mentally triggers like, who wants to be the asshole who doesn't respond to an introduction? Like who wants to be the person that's just like, well, I let that go cold. So I think, there's some creative ways to go about it. But I think what's not working is the stuff that's everybody's seen before, the disingenuous form letter style. Like, I stumbled across your post. Like, there's a lot of people stumbling on the internet. I'm concerned, like, get better shoes or like get out there. Like, who stumbles across anything? Nobody believes that line anymore. So I think either you want to be not sneaky or deceitful, but just intentional about who you curate and doing things that don't scale and really get to know the person you're pitching, or you want to do something that kind of surprises them. But like the traditional lines are like, I think this would be great for your audience. Like 99% of the time you're wrong. It has nothing to do with my audience. I'd try.
I have one to give away here.
Please.
Only because we're amongst friends. I don't usually give things like this away, but I'm just cracking up at all. I get so many of these. We all get so many of these like link requests. But what I've found works really well is kind of like inbound, outbound. Like signing up, if someone signs up for like my newsletter, I sign up for someone's newsletter. And then a newsletter comes that's actually relevant and you have something to say to it that prompts like something and ends up in a link or a guest post or whatever, then it's like totally in line. Someone's always generally going to read if there's like a corporate blog or something, they generally read the responses to that outbound communication. So if like it's almost like they started it. You know what I mean? That's what I found works well for myself.
Yeah. And for me, just for me, for link building, it's always been number one is kind of like you said, is staying away from the shit that, you know, everyone's doing. Right. The thing about the SEO marketing space is once like one little secret gets out, like it gets beaten to death overnight. Overnight. I'll literally get an email from Pakistan the next day of like asking me to use my exact same pitch. I'm like, damn, dude, that came out yesterday. But for me, like you said, you know, even though we have a course that teaches link building at scale, it's gotten to the point where it used to be worth it like a couple of years ago because you could do it from a burner email account. It would have no impact on the brand, blah, 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 this and that. But it's just not as effective anymore as just going to one-to-one level. And like you said, it's just like influencer out, building a list of influencers, people who, you know, not only will the link matter, but, you know, the social traffic might matter. You know, it's like building a list of true opportunities and sending an email one by one. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Sending an email one by one. And just understanding what the value is to that person. Right. And that takes a little bit of research, digging around their website, finding a blog post for them and being like, hey, I'll share this on, you know, my Twitter. If you have a good social following, like share it. And don't say, I will share it, share it. And then send them the link of you sharing it ahead of time, or share it a week ahead, tag them so they know, and then follow up a week later and be like, hey, you know, I just want to let you know I shared this on Twitter, blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, go out of your way to try and build that relationship first. And just the nature of link building too is that with Google kind of just ignoring so many links is that it takes more effort to get those big links, but those big links are still what move the needle. That's the only thing that moves the needle, right? So putting in that little bit of extra time to do so. And we have a few more minutes. I was going to also ask you about sales outreach, cold outreach. I mean, it's probably in the same vein as what we just talked about, but you know, it's the same thing on LinkedIn, right? With these sales messages that we get, but there are some, and it's actually funny is because we all kind of like not make fun, but we poke fun at these emails that we get because they're so stupid. But at the end of the day, I met David sent me a cold email and now we're business partners years ago. You know what I'm saying? So it does work, right? It's it's just a matter of, you know, I think that outreach, sales, networking, link building, whatever it may be, it just works so much better when you don't use any software. You open up an email, you do your research on that person. And I mean, it's the same thing. I just told David, I had a sales call yesterday. I just closed this consulting client from a DM I sent them on Instagram. But that DM wasn't just like, hey, sir, how are you? Like, it was, yo, like, I went to your website. I put together a document for you. It's already done. Here's a video that I shot. Like, I literally went out of my way to go through this because I really wanted to get in touch with this person. And it worked. And I closed them via DM, phone call, close, you know? These things do work, but like, with the level of automation that we have, there's so much to be said about putting in the personal time, especially when people know that you're busy. They appreciate it. They respect it. And at the end of the day, even if I didn't close that client, I've opened up a relationship and a door with that person, you know, and that to me means just as much because you never know where that might lead. So just kind of closing on that vein is that, yeah, I mean, taking a little bit of extra time to do things the personal way goes a very long way. And it's the same thing with copy too.
Same with copy and case studies. Do the homework.
Yeah, I think two things I would say too, going back to the conversation on link building, because this is something I can't believe more companies don't do. And we're starting to, like, for a case study by now, we're starting to focus on improving our organic search and all that. And one of the things we're going to do is like, why, you know, to me, link building has always felt like swimming upstream. Like you're fighting the natural behavior of what people do. Whereas like, I like to jujitsu things, like take the things people are already doing and use those to your advantage. So what does every sad little intern writing content at an agency need for their posts? Stats. Everybody wants to cite a study. Everybody wants to have a metric. Everybody wants to be able to point to something that's a trend or whatever. I do not understand, given how cheap the tools have become and how accessible it's become, why more companies don't do primary research. Like sending out a short survey, collecting feedback, and trotting out that metric and saying, hey, we did a study of X, Y, Z. That's like one of the, and publishing that and getting, because that's the easiest ask ever, saying, hey, we just did a study. This stat actually complements the post you just wrote. You could include it to bolster your point. Or, hey, we just did a study. This actually runs counter to the post that you just put out there. Maybe you could do something on it instead. So that, to me, that's like, why work hard to get people to do things that nobody does, like go to a 3-year-old post and update a link? Like that's not natural behavior versus like including a stat or metric that is. And then when I think back, like I off cold emails, like I'm a busy person, right? Like I don't give my time to just anybody. And these days I charge for it. I took on my mentorship. I've been asked for mentorship like 50 times. A 14-year-old kid sent me an email. I accepted. Now, what was the difference? Also, other people email me the things that I've said yes to. When I look back and it's like, what's the common denominator in the cold outreach that I respond to and like becomes a win for that person? And there's two things. The first is that it's just remarkably genuine. So it doesn't feel like a form letter. It feels like it was written just to me, because in all cases it has been. But the second is, when I look back, those people always share some aspect of their story, and they know enough about me by the time they're sending it to know that that's a story that clicks with me. Like this kid knew that I was from Calgary. He knew that I had exited the agency world, and he told a story about like basically how he, like his pitch was essentially, I want to live like a successful and interesting life. I want to be like, I don't want to play small. I don't want to play safe. And I guarantee if maybe he didn't, but like the things that I've published on my own personal blogs have been about my journey into that and trying to find that. So he did his homework. When I look at people who ask me for referrals or to support things, right? It's, hey, this is my story. I know you made this transition. I'm trying to make this transition. I genuinely love what I do. And then the ask is always something, even the kid that wanted mentorship, they make it an easy yes. It's not ambiguous. There's clear-cut criteria. They know what they want. And they also show me that they have some skin in the game. So especially for like sales or, you know, those types of requests, when I can see that they've put in some effort, to understand me and understand where I'm coming from, and then made the ask, that makes me feel good. Because not, well, here's a form letter, they blasted out to 19 different people. It's, this person wants to talk to me. And if you can make that come alive, if you can use your story and connect with people and use kind of these storytelling facets in the emails you send in a brief way, no one wants your whole life story in an email. I think that makes a really big difference. It gives a different type of why to the conversation than just revenue and profit and I want something.
Absolutely. And that's it. You got any more questions for him?
No.
Awesome, man. This was really good, Joel. We really appreciate this. This was a lot of knowledge that I think we're both a little bit lacking in on the copy. And I mean, you're so much more than a copywriter too. I mean, the business and sales strategy behind this too is very real. So tell the people one more time who you are, how they get in touch with you, and how they can pay you.
Yeah, sure. So on the conversion copywriting side, you can check my stuff out at businesscasualcopywriting.com. Site's from 2013, so don't judge it too harshly. I did mention, you know, I'm winding down a lot of what I do there, but there is something that is accessible to more people. So an offering that I have there is I do audits. I will at various different tiers, all the way from pretty affordable to like the full-blown crazy thing I do for enterprise companies. But I can tell you what's broken, how to fix it, give you recommendations, go away and do it. And I've had companies add 6 figures in revenue by making simple changes without me writing a word for them. So that's one opportunity, business casual copywriting. Case Study Buddy is the team. We have lots of capacity. There's no constraints there whatsoever. We help you capture, share, and cash in on customer success stories. And if you go to casestudybuddy.com, you can check out samples, our process, our pricing. You can send us an email if you want to ask questions, you want to kick something off. And that is where there's also blog posts. If you just want to DIY, you're not at a place yet to be hiring somebody to do that, hey, no problem. We hope you'll get there one day. But there are posts there about things like how to write a case study when you don't have any metrics, what every case study intro should include. So you can check out some content there. And if nothing else, that'll make your own work better. And thanks for having me, guys. This was really fun.
Thanks a lot, Joel. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Take care.